His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa arrived in Oman on a state visit following the invitation of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman. During the visit, His Majesty holds discussions with His Majesty the Sultan on the strong bilateral relations and ways to further enhance the strategic cooperation in all fields, in addition to discussing the current regional and international developments. Upon arrival, His Majesty the King
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الضيف الكريم، نرحب بكم في بلدكم سلطنة عمان، ونتشرف بمرافقتكم إلى حين وصولكم بإذن الله.
البحرين، يا أخي عندي رسالة من جلالة الملك ملك البحرين، وهي تقدر لكم ولسلاح الجو السلطاني هذا الاستقبال، وبارك الله فيكم.
Upon arrival at the private royal airport, His Majesty was received by His Majesty the Sultan, wishing His Majesty and the accompanying delegation a pleasant stay in Oman. His Majesty the King then issued a statement in which he expressed pleasure in visiting Oman. On a visit to Oman in response to the kind invitation of His Majesty the Sultan, which reflects the close historical relations between the two brotherly countries and the ties of harmony and brotherhood that unite the two countries and peoples throughout history. His Majesty praised the development and growth of the bilateral cooperation in various fields and the tangible efforts made by the two brotherly countries to upgrade it to more comprehensive levels in order to strengthen the common ties and mutual interests in order to benefit of the two countries and their peoples. His Majesty hailed Oman's progress and comprehensive developmental renaissance in various fields, aimed at achieving more accomplishments for the benefit of the brotherly Omani people under the leadership of His Majesty the Sultan. His Majesty also received by their Highnesses, ministers, senior officials, ambassadors of both countries, members of the Mission of Honor, and members of the Bahraini Embassy. His Majesty the King and His Majesty the Sultan then headed to the hall, passing between the two rows of guards of honor from the Omani Royal Guard. And to shed more light on His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa's visit to Oman upon the invitation of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman, we have the start with our correspondent Abdurrahman Al Midfa from Muscat.
Today marks a significant and extraordinary occasion as His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa arrives in the Sultanate of Oman on a state visit upon the invitation of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq. This visit is not just a formal meeting, it is a reaffirmation of the deep historical ties that have long connected Dilmun and Majan. And these historical relations continue to prosper through bonds of brotherhood and mutual respect shared by the people of the two countries. This visit is not only a celebration of a shared past, but also a step towards shaping a brighter future. It carries dimensions of advancing bilateral cooperation across various fields, along with discussions on regional developments and international issues. It highlights the mutual commitment of both nations to work together for greater prosperity and development. From Muscat reporting for Bahrain International, I am Abdurrahman Al-Midfa.
After a short break during which Their Majesties exchanged cordial talks on the distinguished fraternal relations, Their Majesties' motorcade left the private royal airport and headed to Al Alam Palace, where official and popular reception ceremonies were held for His Majesty the King. After the motorcade crossed the Muscat Gate, a group of camel cavalry lined up to greet His Majesty the King. After that, the Omani cavalry and the Omani Royal Guard cavalry escorted the official motorcade accompanied by military music until reaching the National Museum. Upon the arrival of the motorcade of Their Majesties to Al Alam Palace entrance, a popular reception was held where a number of traditional art groups and Ayala art groups lined up with welcoming chants.
سلطان واخوه الملك ترحيب بالعزه سلك الى المعالي بالسلام والملك الله يدوم الله يواب سلام من وافي العهد سلطاننا العز المقد هيثم يعل فال السعد وعمان في اعلى مقام والملك لله يدوم يدوم.
As Their Majesty's motorcade arrived at the inner courtyard of Al Alam Palace, the artillery fired 21 shots to welcome His Majesty the King, and the Omani Royal Guard played a musical piece. After that, His Majesty the Sultan accompanied His Majesty the King to the honor podium where the Bahraini national anthem was played.
السلام الوطني لمملكة البحرين. سلام.
His Majesty then greeted senior Omani officials, including a number of their highnesses, the heads of the state and shura councils, ministers, commanders of the Sultanate's armed forces and the Oman police. His Majesty the Sultan also greeted the accompanying delegation of His Majesty the King. The mission of honor was led by the Interior Minister Mahmoud bin Faisal al-Busaidi. His Majesty was accompanied by the personal representative of His Majesty the King, His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the representative of His Majesty the King for Humanitarian Work and Youth Affairs, His Highness Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the first Deputy Chairman of the Supreme Council for Youth and Sports, Chairman of the General Sports Authority and President of the Bahrain Olympic Committee, His Highness Sheikh Khalid bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Minister of the Royal Court, Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, Deputy Chairman of the Supreme Committee for Urban Planning, Sheikh Salman bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, the Minister of Interior General Sheikh Rashid bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, the Media Advisor to His Majesty the King Nabil Yaqub Al Hamar, the Advisor to His Majesty the King for Diplomatic Affairs Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed bin Muhammad Al Khalifa, Public Affairs Minister at the Royal Court Majid bin Ali Naimi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al-Zayyani, the Minister of Finance and National Economy Sheikh Salman bin Khalifa Al Khalifa, the Head of Royal Protocol Sheikh Khalifa bin Ahmed Al Fadala, Personal Secretary to His Majesty the King Hamad bin Ali Al-Ka'bi, the Minister of Industry and Commerce Abdullah Adil Fakhro, the Head of Follow-up of Royal Affairs Muhammad Bahassan Al-Msallam, President of the National Intelligence Agency Major General Bassam Muhammad Al-Ma'raj, and the Ambassador of Bahrain to Oman Dr. Jum'a bin Ahmed Al-Ka'bi. His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa held an official discussion session with His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman at Al Alam Palace in the Omani capital Muscat on the occasion of His Majesty's state visit to Oman. At the beginning of the session, His Majesty expressed thanks and appreciation to His Majesty the Sultan of Oman for the warm welcome, hospitality and accorded to him, and expressed his pleasure in visiting Oman and meeting His Majesty, praying to Allah the Almighty to bless Oman and its people with progress and prosperity under the leadership of His Majesty the Sultan. His Majesty the Sultan of Oman welcomed His Majesty the King of Oman, who are united with Bahrain by ties of kinship, brotherhood and common destiny, During the session, which was attended by the delegations of both countries, Their Majesties reviewed the fraternal past of close historical relations and various aspects of cooperation and coordination and ways to enhance and develop them within the framework of the strong fraternal ties that unite the two brotherly countries. They emphasized their continued keenness to develop these long-standing relations, enhance cooperation, and develop mechanisms of coordination and joint action, in all to promote their mutual interests and serve common aspirations. His Majesty the King stressed that the Bahraini-Omani relations are strong and well established. They are an honorable example of distinguished relations between countries based on solid foundations of interdependence, visions, understanding and coordination. His Majesty praised the endeavors of His Majesty the Sultan in consolidating ties between the two countries, the comprehensive development march and the developmental and civilizational achievements witnessed by Oman under His Majesty's leadership. The meeting discussed joint Gulf action in light of the challenges in the region and the importance of strengthening it to achieve the interests of the GCC countries and their peoples and enhance the security and stability of the region. The two sides also discussed the most important regional and international developments, particularly the situation in the Middle East and a number of topics of interest, stressing the importance of concerted efforts to maintain regional stability and spare the region the consequences of new crises that threaten its security and stability, in addition to working to find a path for a just, a comprehensive and lasting peace based on the two-state solution that guarantees stability and security for all. His Majesty the Sultan of Oman expressed the pride of the Sultanate and its people in the visit of His Majesty the King, which serves the interest of the two countries and strengthens their fraternal ties, praising His Majesty's role and keenness to develop bilateral relations, praising Bahrain's progress, development and achievements at various levels thanks to His Majesty's approach. And for more on the official reception ceremony held for His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa upon his arrival in Oman, we have this stand with our correspondent Abdurrahman Al-Midfa from Muscat.
From the moment His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa arrived in Muscat, the welcoming and joyful scene reflected the strong ties between Bahrain and Oman. The road stretching from the historic gate of Muscat to Al Alam Palace was a remarkable spectacle, with Omani camel riders, horsemen and traditional performance groups lining the way to greet His Majesty the King. This official and public celebration is steeped in profound symbolism. It is an expression of the enduring ties that have united Bahrain and Oman for decades. These grand gestures affirm that the relationship between the two nations is not just a partnership, but a deep and unique brotherhood with roots firmly embedded in history. From Al Alam Palace, reporting for Bahrain International, I am Abdulrahman Al-Madfa'a.
In honor of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman hosted a dinner banquet on the occasion of His Majesty's state visit to the Sultanate at Al Alam Palace this evening. His Majesty the King and the Sultan Haytham bin Tariq exchanged commemorative gifts at the beginning of the banquet, which was attended by members of the official delegation accompanying His Majesty and senior officials in the Sultanate of Oman. The Royal Guard Band played the Bahraini Royal Anthem. During the banquet, His Majesty the King and His Majesty the Sultan of Oman exchanged cordial talks that reflect the close brotherly ties between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Sultanate of Oman and their mutual interest in further strengthening them for the good of the two countries and the interests of their brotherly peoples. His Majesty reiterated his thanks and appreciation for the warm hospitality he and the accompanying delegation received from the moment they arrived in the Sultanate of Oman, which reflected the depth and excellence of Bahraini-Omani relations. For his part, His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq expressed his confidence that His Majesty the King's visit will represent a boost to the strong fraternal relations, wishing the Kingdom continued progress and prosperity under the wise leadership of His Majesty the King. At the end of the dinner banquet, the band played the Omani Royal Anthem. Earlier, His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa departed Bahrain and headed to Oman following an invitation by His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman, in which their Majesties held talks on the deep brotherly relations and ways to enhance them, in addition to discussing the recent regional and international developments.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الضيف الكريم، نرحب بكم في بلدكم سلطنة عمان، ونتشرف بمرافقتكم إلى حين وصولكم بإذن الله.
البحرين يا أخي، عندي رسالة من جلالة الملك ملك البحرين، وهي نقدر لكم ولإصلاح الجو السلطاني هذا الاستقبال، وبارك الله فيكم.
The Bahraini-Omani relations enjoy special care and attention from His Majesty the King and His Majesty the Sultan of Oman in light of their historic brotherly relations that are based on unity of destiny and purpose. More in this report.
The relations between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Sultanate of Oman are rooted deep in history and are based on brotherhood and cooperation, making these relations a model to be followed in the region. The roots of these relations embody the spirit of brotherhood between the two countries and their peoples, where mutual visits have played a pivotal role in strengthening the strong relationship. The continuous and reciprocal visits between the leaders of the two countries come as a result of the well-established bilateral relations and the strong bonds of brotherhood that unite them. These visits represent a continuation of the process of renaissance, construction and development led by the governments of both countries, serving the interests of all as part of the One Arab Gulf system. The foundation stone laid by the leaders of the two countries hundreds of years ago has led the way for relations between Manama and Muscat at all levels, paving the way for a number of cooperation, understandings and partnerships that have benefited the two countries and their peoples. His Majesty the King's state visit to Oman in 2000 was a prominent example of the depth of historical relations between the two countries, during which several agreements and MOUs were signed that strengthened the bonds of cooperation and coordination. Meanwhile, the visit of His Majesty the Sultan of Oman to Bahrain in 2022 also emphasized the strength of the fraternal ties between the two countries, their governments and peoples throughout history. The bilateral relations continue to develop, and the level of cooperation continued to strengthen at all levels and contributed to promoting development and prosperity for both countries.
The visit of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman to the Kingdom of Bahrain 2022 marked an important milestone in strengthening the historical fraternal relations between the two brotherly countries. The visit resulted in strategic outcomes that strengthened joint cooperation in multiple fields. More in this report.
On October 24, 2022, His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq of Oman paid an official visit to the Kingdom of Bahrain at the invitation of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. During the meeting, the two leaders emphasized the importance of continuing to develop cooperation in all fields, especially economic, trade and investment, and enhancing cooperation between the private sectors of both countries. The two sides also expressed their pride in signing a number of agreements, memorandums of understanding and executive programs in various fields, which will advance cooperation to meet the aspirations of the two countries and their brotherly peoples. The Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Oman Chamber of Commerce and Industry also signed the establishment of the Bahrain Oman Investment Company to serve as a nucleus for investment and investors with the aim of increasing partnership and business between private sector organizations. The two sides also discussed joint Gulf action and emphasized the need to strengthen the cohesion of the GCC, affirm the unity of its countries and peoples to face various challenges, and continue to fulfill the aspirations of the member states toward greater solidarity and integration. The two leaders discussed regional and international developments and stressed the importance of joint coordination in regional and international organizations and forums to serve their mutual interests and strengthen efforts to consolidate the pillars of regional security and stability. This visit was an important milestone in the course of Bahraini-Omani relations, as it established a new phase of cooperation and consensus between the two countries in various fields.
Bahrain's ambassador to Oman, Dr. Jum'a bin Ahmed Al-Ka'bi, emphasized that the state visit of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa to Oman reflects the historical ties between the two countries. The ambassador stressed that the keenness of the two leaders to further develop relations between the two countries strengthens cooperation and fraternal ties and preserves the depth of close historical ties. Diplomacy between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Sultanate of Oman plays an important role in strengthening relations between the two brotherly countries in various fields, in addition to their complementary role in achieving regional and international stability and peace. More in this report.
The diplomacy between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Sultanate of Oman is characterized by its historical depth, strategic cooperation, and continuous coordination towards various topics and issues facing the region, based on the visions of His Majesty the King and His Majesty the Sultan of Oman. Bahraini-Omani diplomacy converges in many aspects, foremost of which are the close fraternal relations and their common destiny, consultation and coordination on regional and international issues and challenges, bilateral cooperation in various sectors, especially the economic sector, activating plans to attract investment and diversify non-oil sources of income, continuous communication between the members of the Joint Ministerial Committee, and the ambitious vision of the two countries that shape the future at all levels. Efforts led by the Bahraini-Omani diplomacy in the path of international politics to achieve Gulf and Arab unity and confront global challenges resulted in the position of the two countries in support of the Gulf and joint Arab action, supporting just and legitimate Arab and Islamic causes, contributing to maintaining international peace and security, partnering in achieving stability and sustainable development, promoting peaceful coexistence, tolerance and openness for the security and interest of all.
Oman's ambassador to Bahrain, Faisal bin Harbi al-Bus'idi, emphasized that the state visit by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa to Oman is part of a series of reciprocal visits between the leaderships of the two countries that increases cooperation. He stressed the keenness of the two leaderships to further develop joint bilateral work, increase partnership and cooperation in various domains, and develop bilateral relations. Oman made qualitative leaps in various political, economic, social, cultural and military fields since His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq accession to the throne, and over the past 5 years, Omani achievements have reflected positively on a number of prominent sectors in the Sultanate. More in this report.
Oman has solidified its position as a country that enjoys stability and internal growth, in addition to excellence in its usual balance in its regional and international policies. During the past 5 years, His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq's vision was the main driver of the government's distinctive work, which contributed to the development of the state's administrative apparatus to achieve the country's development aspirations. The Omani government has prioritized the issuance of the Basic Law of the state, which marked a new stage in the building of the state of law and institutions, in addition to the issuance of laws regulating economic activities, which received some attention and care in updating them, in line with the rapid development of the country, in addition to enacting legislation regulating social activities aimed at enhancing the quality of life for citizens and residents, and finally, the new media law, which seeks to promote responsible media democracy, transparency, and governance. Oman continues to launch a package of initiatives and efforts to develop government decision-making mechanisms to serve the country's interest through a series of reforms and measures aimed at renewing the Omani Renaissance during the era of His Majesty the Sultan.
Since the accession of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq to the throne, the Omani economy has achieved remarkable positive growth thanks to the economic diversification plans, boosting non-oil revenues and expanding the productive base of the economy. His Majesty the Sultan's vision for the development of Oman's governorates also represented a strategic step to achieve comprehensive and sustainable development economically and socially. The economic and commercial relations between Bahrain and Oman are witnessing an accelerated development reflected by the continuous growth in various vital domains.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الضيف الكريم، نرحب بكم في بلدكم سلطنة عمان، ونتشرف بمرافقتكم إلى حين وصولكم بإذن الله.
البحرين يا أخي، عندي رسالة من جلالة الملك ملك البحرين، وهي نقدر لكم ولسلاح الجو السلطاني هذا الاستقبال، وبارك الله فيكم.
السلام الوطني لمملكة البحرين.
His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa issued Edict 4 of 2025 appointing directors at the Ministry of Information based on a proposal by the Minister of Information. Article 1. The Director of the Television Directorate at the Ministry of Information, Qais Hassan al-Dosari, shall be retired upon his request. Article 2. Abdulrahman Khamis Adili Al-Rumehi shall be appointed as Director of Creativity and Electronic Media at the Ministry of Information, replacing Maryam Isa Bukamal. Article 3. Badr Muhammad Hassan Abdullah shall be appointed as Director of Radio, the Ministry of Information, replacing Yunus Salman Hassan. Article 4. The following individuals shall also be appointed at the Ministry of Information: Abdulrahman Khamis Abdulrahman Azayani as Director of Television, Ali Abdul Hussein Jawad Rali as Director of Sports Media, Sarah Muhammad Saeed Mahdi as Director of Strategic Planning and Projects. His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa deputized the personal representative of His Majesty the King His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa to attend a reception ceremony for the heads of diplomatic missions abroad and senior officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Bahrain's Diplomatic Day, which falls on January 14th in the presence of His Majesty the King's representative for Humanitarian Work and Youth Affairs, His Highness Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa, and His Majesty's Advisor for Diplomatic Affairs, Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed bin Muhammad Al Khalifa at Sheikh Hamad Palace in Ghlabiyah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سمو الشيخ عبد الله بن حمد آل خليفة، الممثل الشخصي لجلالة الملك المعظم، أصحاب السمو، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أيها الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. يسعدنا أن نرحب بكم أجمل ترحيب في الاحتفال باليوم الدبلوماسي لمملكة البحرين، والذي يقام تحت الرعاية الملكية السامية لسيدي حضرة صاحب الجلالة الملك حمد بن عيسى آل خليفة ملك البلاد المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه. وخير ما نبدأ به تلاوة عطرة من القرآن الكريم يتلوها على مسامعنا القارئ عبد الرحمن أحمد الخلاصي.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وأدخل الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها بإذن ربهم تحيتهم فيها سلام. ألم تر كيف ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء تؤتي أكلها كل حين بإذن ربها ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون. ومثل كلمة خبيثة كشجرة خبيثة اجتثت من فوق الأرض ما لها من قرار. يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ويضل الله الظالمين ويفعل الله ما يشاء.
يلقي الآن سعادة الدكتور عبد اللطيف بن راشد الزياني وزير الخارجية كلمة بهذه المناسبة.
After recitation of verses from the Holy Quran, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid al-Zayani, delivered the following speech.
رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على الرسول الكريم نبينا محمد الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سمو الشيخ عبد الله بن حمد بن عيسى آل خليفة الممثل الشخصي لجلالة الملك المعظم رئيس المجلس الأعلى للبيئة حفظكم الله، أصحاب السمو، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الحضور الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إنه لشرف عظيم أن أقف أمامكم اليوم للاحتفال بمناسبة وطنية غالية يعتز بها كافة الدبلوماسيين، مناسبة اليوم الدبلوماسي. هذا اليوم الذي خصصه سيدي حضرة صاحب الجلالة الملك حمد بن عيسى آل خليفة ملك البلاد المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه، تقديراً للدور المحوري الذي تقوم به الدبلوماسية البحرينية في تنفيذ السياسة الخارجية لمملكة البحرين وتعزيز روابط الصداقة والتعاون مع دول العالم والتفاني في رعاية مصالح الوطن والمواطنين في الخارج ونشر قيم التسامح والإخاء والتعايش الإنساني والتعاون البناء. أرفع إلى جلالة الملك المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه خالص الشكر والامتنان على الدعم الثابت والتقدير الكبير الذي كنه لوزارة الخارجية ودبلوماسيتها الفاعلة. إن الرعاية والتوجيهات السامية من جلالته تمكننا من التعامل مع تعقيدات العلاقات الدولية بثقة وعزم. والشكر والثناء لصاحب السمو الملكي الأمير سلمان بن حمد آل خليفة ولي العهد رئيس مجلس الوزراء حفظه الله لدعمه المتواصل والالتزامه الثابت برعاية علاقات الصداقة مع دول العالم وفتح مجالات أوسع للتعاون المشترك بما يعزز مكانة الوطن الغالي على الساحة الدولية ويحقق أهدافه السامية. صاحب السمو، يسرني أن أتقدم إلى سموكم الكريم بوافر الشكر والتقدير على استقبالكم اليوم نيابة عن جلالة الملك المعظم، والترحيب بأصحاب المعالي والسعادة رؤساء البعثات الدبلوماسية وكبار المسؤولين، تقديراً من جلالته ودعماً لأبنائه الدبلوماسيين والدبلوماسيات، وتعبيراً عن إيمانه رعاه الله بالدور الحيوي والبناء للدبلوماسية البحرينية في خدمة الوطن والمواطنين، وتعزيز الاحترام المتبادل والتعاون مع الدول الشقيقة والصديقة وإعلاء مكانة المملكة الدولية. الحضور الكرام، إن للدبلوماسية دورا فاعلا ومؤثرا في تعزيز السلام والازدهار الإقليميين، فهي تسهم في التوصل إلى حلول سلمية للنزاعات وتهدئة الصراعات وتعزيز الاحترام المتبادل والتفاهم والتعاون المشترك بين الدول، وهي بمثابة الجسر الذي يوحدنا ويغذي التعايش ويسهل الجهود التعاونية التي تضمن الرخاء الجماعي في عالم مترابط بشكل متزايد. وما نجاح القمة العربية 33 التي ترأسها جلالة الملك المعظم والمخرجات والمبادرات التي اعتمدتها، وما تضمنه إعلان البحرين من مواقف ثابتة تجاه مختلف التحديات الإقليمية والدولية، إلا دليلا ناصعا على فاعلية الدبلوماسية في توحيد الجهود والطاقات من أجل تعزيز التضامن والتعاون العربي. وأود أن أغتنم هذه المناسبة ليعرب عن الشكر والتقدير لكم أصحاب المعالي والسعادة رؤساء البعثات الدبلوماسية لمملكة البحرين ووكلاء الوزارة ومدراء العموم وكافة منسوبي الوزارة من دبلوماسيين وإداريين، إن جهودكم الدؤوبة وتفانيكم في الوفاء بمسؤولياتكم بكل كفاءة واقتدار، والتزامكم الثابت بخدمة وطننا الغالي والمواطنين الكرام والمقيمين تستحق أعلى درجات التقدير والاحترام. كما أود أن أشيد بضيوفنا الكرام رؤساء البعثات الدبلوماسية المعتمدين لدى المملكة إن حضوركم اليوم وجهودكم الدؤوبة لتعزيز العلاقات الثنائية بين مملكة البحرين ودولكم الشقيقة والصديقة، وبين المملكة والمنظمات الدولية جميعها محل تقدير كبير، فإن التزامكم بتعزيز التعاون المشترك يشكل أداة حيوية لتحقيق أهدافنا المشتركة وتأمين مستقبل أكثر إشراقا للجميع. الحضور الكرام، أود أن أعرب عن خالص الشكر والامتنان لأسركم الكريمة، فخلف كل دبلوماسي ناجح تقف أسرة داعمة تفهم متطلبات المهمة وتشجع التميز من خلال التفاني في أداء الواجب. إننا ندرك ونقدر التضحيات التي تقدمها هذه الأسر ودورها الحاسم في نجاح عمل البعثات الدبلوماسية، فلهم منا كل التقدير والعرفان. وشكرا لسموكم الكريم على تشريفنا بحضوركم نيابة عن جلالة الملك المعظم، والشكر واجب لجميع الدبلوماسيين على تفانيهم وسعيهم الدؤوب لتحقيق السلام والتزامهم بالقيم التي توحدنا معا كمجتمع عالمي. نسأل الله العلي القدير أن يديم على جلالة الملك المعظم نعمة الصحة والعافية والعمر المديد، وأن يمده بالعون والتأييد، وأن يحفظ وطننا آمنا مستقرا ومزدهرا. أتمنى للجميع يوما دبلوماسيا سعيدا، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يتشرف سعادة وزير الخارجية وجميع منتسبي الوزارة بتقديم هدية تذكارية إلى سيدي حضرة صاحب الجلالة ملك البلاد المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه.
The Minister then presented a commemorative gift to His Majesty the King, presented by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was received by His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad. Chaired by the Speaker of the Representatives Council, Ahmed bin Salman Al Msallam, the Council held its 14th ordinary session of the 3rd annual session of the 6th legislative term. During the session, the Council reviewed the responses to 2 questions by MPs regarding the total number of job seekers files and the registered unemployment rate in the Kingdom. The Council also reviewed a number of draft laws, including the Immigration and Residence Law of 1965. The Council decided to take a final opinion of the draft law as a matter of urgency at the same session and approved it as a whole and referred it to the Shura Council. The Council discussed the final report of the Parliamentary Investigation Committee on the Bahrainization of jobs in the public and private sectors and decided to approve the committee's proposals and refer them to the government. Regarding the draft law's proposals, the Council discussed the traffic law and agreed to send the report back to the committee for a month of further studies. Meanwhile, the Council discussed the environment law and approved the draft law and referred it to the government. The Council also approved 3 proposals, namely the allocation of an amount of not less than 500 million dinars in the draft law of the next generational budget 2025 to 2026. The proposal is to regulate the passage of trucks and heavy vehicles through King Hamad Road in Sitra and its suburbs. Minister of Electricity and Water Affairs Yasser bin Ibrahim Hamidan attended the opening of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week 2025 and the 2025 Zayed Sustainability Prize ceremony at the Abu Dhabi National Exhibition Centre. The events were held under the patronage of the UAE President and attended by dignitaries, world leaders, government officials, experts in sustainable energy, and guests from around the globe. The minister stressed Bahrain's commitment to advancing sustainability in electricity and water by adopting advanced technologies, innovative solutions, and engaging with experts and decision makers to explore the latest global trends in sustainable energy. He highlighted Bahrain's dedication to ongoing international collaboration to address environmental challenges and accelerate sustainable development for future generations. Ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain to the United States of America, Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Khalifa, delivered a presentation entitled U.S. Foreign Policy and Its Impact on International and Regional Arena in the presence of heads of diplomatic and consular missions abroad and senior officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The ambassador expressed his pride in Bahraini diplomacy, which practices its approach and pivotal role thanks to the wise vision of His Majesty the King and the support and directives of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, praising the efforts of previous generations of diplomats in consolidating the kingdom's position on international scene. He also praised the speech of the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the opening of the forum yesterday, in which he stressed the vision of His Majesty the King that is based on strengthening global solidarity and advancing human security. The ambassador praised the long-standing relations between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the United States of America and the effective strategic partnership in various fields. The ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain in Washington concluded his presentation by emphasizing that Bahraini diplomacy, thanks to its insightful vision and distinguished relations with the leaders of the U.S. administration, is capable of facing challenges and achieving strategic gains that enhance Bahrain's regional and international interests. Director General of Bilateral Relations, Ambassador Sheikh Abdullah bin Ali Al Khalifa, delivered a presentation entitled Achievements of 2024 and Foreign Policy Directions for 2025. The ambassador expressed his pride in holding the diplomatic forum, which coincides with the celebration of the Diplomatic Day of the Kingdom of Bahrain, highlighting Bahrain's balanced approach and its foreign policy that comes within the framework of its established priorities under the leadership of His Majesty the King and the directives of the government headed by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister. The Director General of Bilateral Relations reviewed the diplomatic achievements of the Kingdom of Bahrain during 2024, explaining that the Kingdom of Bahrain's hosting of the 33rd Arab Summit, Bahrain Summit, was a milestone in the Kingdom of Bahrain's pioneering diplomatic role. Regarding bilateral relations, the ambassador pointed out that last year witnessed more than 140 official visits between the Kingdom of Bahrain and countries of the world, including historic visits by His Majesty the King and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister to a number of countries, which led to the signing of important strategic agreements. The Director General of Bilateral Relations stated that the Kingdom of Bahrain announced the establishment of diplomatic relations with 4 new countries, bringing the total number of international partners to 190 countries. 8 agreements, 41 memoranda of understanding and 3 executive programs were signed during the year. Regarding the foreign policy directions for the year 2025, Ambassador Sheikh Abdullah bin Ali Al Khalifa reviewed the most prominent positions of the Kingdom of Bahrain towards various regional and international issues.